Wallace, they let
Yeah,
you.
and then it wouldn't let me connect to the internet when I got in my office.
We're just having, it is
One
good to
of
see you. We
those
know there
days.
were some technical joys with the service this morning. Don't worry, we have it saved. We will make sure that a copy of the service is up so you can hear the beautiful music. Wallace's wonderful message today. It was not an easy gospel, but he did a great job of talking about seeing yourself and realizing the relationships that are hard in our world, and how to see the face of Christ in each person we encounter, and the systems that need to change in order for us all to be the best we can be. He did it better than I did. So I encourage you to listen to his sermon as it gets posted on the interwebs. It is great to see you coming on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh yeah, Wallace, you're going to do the introduction, but I'm just on the welcome.
You can just
one.
welcome people. Use your
Thank
7
you,
Enneagram
friend.
and go to town.
Woohoo! We tease each other about our Enneagram types. I'm glad to see every single one of you. It makes
I
me
know
so
we're not
happy.
supposed to do that, technically, correct?
Technically, I'll own it. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. Love a good gathering of people. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad to see you this Sunday before Thanksgiving. Those major holidays with new and major differences of how we will then celebrate the holidays, gratefully, but in a different way. I'm contemplating having a Zoom with my entire family. The last time we did that was in April. So, new and different fun things all at once. Let me rephrase. I have talked to my family since April. It's just all on one Zoom was much in April. We didn't do it since then. Because sometimes it's good to have one-on-one, one-to-one time versus all 7 of us all in one space. 7, 8 of us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is great to see you here this Sunday morning. We are so glad you're taking time this morning, because we know that Dr. Jay Reeve has great things to share.
So.
We were talking at staff meeting, Jay. It was hard to believe that the last time you joined us for a coffee talk was in July.
That's
and that
right.
feels like yesterday,
Yeah.
not 4 months ago. That's the hard part to wrap our heads around.
It was crazy, yeah.
You were in the same room.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I am, as a matter of fact.
I think I was at the beach.
I haven't really moved since July, so.
All right, Father Wallace, you think you're ready?
Sure, I think so. I think we got a couple minutes after, so we'll have folks join us, but the Lord be with you all.
And also with
you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for this day and for this opportunity to gather together, and for this parish. Give you thanks for the opportunity to connect via technology in this crazy time, but ask for your patience as we have to deal with technology and all the hiccups and the text messages that are going on our phones right now. But we give you thanks for Dr. Jay Reeve, his presence among us today as we navigate a very difficult time as we gather as families and try to gather and how to gather during this holy season, when we're reminded about the incarnation. The Word became flesh, and we have to remain 6 feet apart and maybe do this virtually. We ask that his words will give us guidance and grace to navigate the days ahead. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Jay, Dr. Jay Reeve here, everybody. So I'm not going to do many introductions because you have heard him before, and we thank you for being here with us today. So thank you for taking time to do this. This means a lot to us, and you were requested by many as at the Adult Education Committee, and your words in July really spoke to us. So bring more wisdom.
Well, I'll do my best. No pressure on that one. The bar's not high. So thank you, Father Wallace. So I'm Jay Reeve. I'm very pleased to be here and appreciate you asking me again. I always enjoy these conversations. I'm the CEO and president of Apalachee Center, the largest mental health center in the region. But for today, what I'm going to do is take off my CEO hat and put back on my psychologist hat, which I wore for about 20 years before getting into the world of administration. So this is coming from, Shrink Jay instead of Boss Jay. So what what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit and have sort of a conversation about the holidays, both Thanksgiving and Christmas, in the time of COVID. And if there are folks who have comments or questions, please feel free to either speak up or put them into the chat. And as I think as Claire and Father Wallace are looking at the chat, you can just sort of let me know if there's questions that are popping up. So this has been quite a year for everybody. I did a program kind of along the same lines last December, in early December, talking a little bit about Christmas and the holidays. And what a difference a year makes, right? So a few things have been changed in that, but some of the spirit remains similar. And we hope, of course, the core spirit remains similar. So today there were three things that I wanted to talk about and that I'd just sort of like you to consider when you're thinking about the holidays this year. And the first of them, they're kind of arranged, and this goes back actually prior to my training as a psychologist, to my early days in divinity school way back when. And so it's the which some of you will recognize as the Hegelian dialectic, which kind of works pretty well in terms of talking about this year and COVID. And so the first of these is meaning versus memory. So that's sort of the first one that I'm going to talk about. Holidays are a really interesting thing in this country. And it's not completely dissimilar from other countries, but it is, I think, uniquely North American to have such a strong emphasis placed on memory around holidays. And when we talk about that a little bit, as you think about Thanksgiving or you think about Christmas, for me, the things that I think about have to do with memories. I'll give you an example of this. My maternal grandmother was German, and so Thanksgiving wasn't such a big thing for her with turkey and all the trimmings, everything she wanted to do. You know, she liked having big family meals, but I wasn't until I was 16 years old that I had a turkey for Thanksgiving. We had chicken. That was what Grandma cooked. So my memories of Thanksgiving are heavily influenced by the smells of the way my grandmother baked chicken and the way my grandmother baked bread. They're heavily influenced by memories of the climate and weather where I grew up, which was upstate New York. So there was always a little bit of snow on the ground. It was invariably gray. It was always pretty cold. We always had chicken. We always had lemon meringue pie for dessert. I got the day off school and would watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on the television before we'd head down to my grandmother's house just south of Rochester. Those were the sense memories that I had around Thanksgiving. Christmas was very similar, right? So my memories of Christmas have to do with the smell of a new cut Christmas tree, the look of the Christmas village underneath our tree, the particular ornaments that my mother and I put on the tree, the thick snow that by that time would be blanketing my hometown of East Rochester, my anticipation of Santa coming and leaving gifts, Christmas carols, and again, actually my grandmother's chicken for Christmas dinner. And of course, the memories of what midnight mass were like in the church that I was raised in, St. Matthias in East Rochester, with the smell of cut pine boughs and the candles burning. So those are all sense memories of holidays. And what we tend to do with holidays is to take those memories of childhood, really not even early adulthood, they're childhood memories, and we compare them to what's happening now. And what's happening now is extremely different, right? What's interesting about it is that for a lot of us, this has always been different. As long as I'm in Florida on Thanksgiving, there's not going to be a scattering of snow. the skies are probably not going to be gray, and I'm not going to be eating my grandmother's chicken, this side of paradise. So the sense memories that we have of holidays are beautiful memories, but they're not very good guides to what our holidays are going to be like this year. They're not reliable because they're really dependent on us going back in time and trying to recapture feelings we had when we were younger. And not only are the sense memories different, not only are the smells different and the tastes different, but we're different, right? We've become adults in the meantime. We have gone away from where we grew up. That's true for every holiday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter, but it is acutely true this year, because one of the things that we tend to do is to try and recapture those feelings, to try and recapture those senses. So it's one of the reasons I think that even in Florida, even in Tallahassee, where we do get snow once every few years, there's such an emphasis on Christmas decorations that have frosted windows and artificial snow on the trees. It's an attempt to recapture and kind of go back to what those of us who grew up north experienced when we were kids. And a lot of our holidays are built around that exact attempt. So part of gathering the families together has to do with trying to recapture some of those feelings. The problem is this year, it's not going to work, right? There's the memory machine is not going to work that way. And so I think a lot of people look at the holidays and they listen to Dr. Fauci talking about small family gatherings being something that we have to be really cautious about in terms of the pandemic. They kind of look at what's happened this year and think, well, these just aren't going to be the same. They're just, this isn't going to feel like Thanksgiving. It's not going to feel like Christmas. And it's really not going to feel like the Thanksgiving or Christmas of our childhood. It's not going to feel like Thanksgiving or Christmas last year, for that matter. What that doesn't mean is that the holiday doesn't have any meaning. What that doesn't mean is that the holiday isn't nourishing in some ways. It's just not going to be nourishing in the way we expect it to be. I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that what I was going to do was kind of put on my psychologist hat. So let me tell you a little bit about, and some of you guys will recognize this from either personal or professional experience. Let me tell you a little bit about something that in my days as a psychotherapist, I used to work on with clients pretty regularly. And that had to do with the not only attachment to the past, but the use of the past as the measuring stick for what was coming in your life now. So actually one of the great challenges that people face in therapy about relationships and romantic relationships is comparing their personal and romantic relationships to those that were had by their parents and those they had with their parents. And that works two ways, right? Folks who grew up in abusive households or emotionally distant households can have some difficulty getting used to a nourishing, intimate adult relationship. Folks who grew up with one kind of parent or one kind of marital bond between their parents can take some time getting used to the fact that you married somebody from a different family. Stuff is new. So there's a lot about therapy that has to do with helping folks relax enough to let go of that. I think in some ways it's kind of similar this year. We've all got an image of what the holidays are supposed to look like, but one thing that's worthwhile asking ourselves is how much of that image, how much of those sense memories from childhood are connected to the intrinsic meaning of the holiday, and how much are nostalgia. And there's nothing wrong with nostalgia, right? That's not a bad word. But there's times when those feelings are not going to be able to be matched. And this year is one of those times. So I think it's kind of imperative for us going into the holiday season to think about what's the meaning behind the Thanksgiving family gathering. Does that meaning get lost when it's happening on Zoom? Does that meaning get lost when you're talking about phone calls and you're not talking about being face to face? Does that meaning get lost when you're telling people I love you on a television screen instead of hugging them? Similarly for Christmas, and actually I think St. John's community is a great example of this. Does the meaning of the Mass and the Eucharist get lost when it's happening virtually? Does the meaning of gathering together on a Sunday morning get lost when it's happening virtually? I don't think it does. I think there's a meaning in the spirit that's intrinsic in gathering together, whether we're doing it electronically, whether we're doing it virtually, or whether we're doing it live. The problem with this, right, this Zoom piece, is that it doesn't smell like church. I mean, it's really that simple, right? You're not sitting in something that feels like a pew. You're not smelling incense. You're not hearing stereo music, but you're still hearing music. You're still with people. You're still with the clergy. You're still gathering together to do the same thing. I think that applies in the holidays. So that's kind of the first piece that I wanted to talk about a little bit, was the meaning versus memory, and being able to let go of the memories, not to ignore them, not to say they're not powerful, but to not have them sort of wrap around the center of what we're doing for this holiday. Does that make sense to you guys? Anybody who's got their camera on and can nod. Okay. Any questions or thoughts about that? Oh, okay. Abby's given me 2 thumbs up, so I can move on to my next point here, which is very connected to this. So if the first piece of something to think about for this holiday is meaning versus memory, then the second part is measuring up versus staying connected. And this, again, it's a related point, but it's maybe a little bit harder to think about. So let me tell you guys a story from my young adulthood and not that young adulthood, but my 20s and my 30s and sort of my early married life. So one of the things that my wife and I did shortly after we got married was we wanted to have holidays at our house. And I've got a very small family. I mean, it was really limited to my mom, and my wife has a fairly large family, but we were living in Delaware at the time. We wanted everybody to come to our house, and we did. Folks came. We had a great time. We had a great Christmas. But one of the things that was in the back of my head the entire time was, how does this measure up to the Christmases I grew up with? Is it warm enough? Is the food lavish enough? That was kind of a big thing for me. Do we have enough food? And, to the point that we'd have way too much food. But is it nurturing enough? Are we going to the right church service, which, as many of you guys can appreciate, is a big deal? Do you go to the early service? Do you go to the late service? I grew up going to the late service. My wife grew up going to the early service. How do we navigate that? So there's a whole series of conversations about it. And as you're thinking through that, one of the things that you've kind of got in your head is this yardstick that, again, like your vision of what the perfect holiday should be, this yardstick was formed largely in childhood. It was formed by your parents. It was formed by your family. There's another place that it was formed by too, which I think we neglect sometimes. It was formed by the media, right? I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but starting in October on television, which, clearly we're all watching more of than we probably did before and probably than we should, on the Hallmark Channel and a couple of the other less guns and violence news outlet channels out there, they started playing Christmas movies. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, ones you've never heard of. Christmas in the Rockies, Christmas in the muffin store, Christmas at the cookie factory, Christmas in the vineyard, Christmas on the high seas, everywhere you could go. And every single one of those media images of Christmas carries a very, very similar message, right? There's snow, there's pine trees, there's usually an unrecognized love that comes to life, and there's a family rift that's healed, and you get to fight off the corporate robber barons and keep the vineyard. I mean, it's pretty similar in most of these. And we could actually have a whole discussion about sort of the core message of those kind of movies. But one of the things that they do is they dovetail very nicely with what we all grew up with in terms of our visions of the holidays. And those form yardsticks in our head to say, is what we're doing measuring up? And the suggestion that I'd make today and for this holiday season is to kind of forget about those yardsticks. Again, not that you can't watch the Hallmark Channel, not that you can't listen to the holiday music stations, but those yardsticks are not going to apply this year. So you've got to think about what does apply. What does this season that, if it's not correlating with what we've seen in the media and what we saw in our families, what's the core of what we're doing? How can we stay connected to the spirit of the season? And I think that's the flip side of the measuring stick, right? Flip side of the measuring stick is staying connected, because I would say the healthy piece and the positive piece of the whole holiday season has to do with connection. It has to do with relationship and human connection. And that can be with your birth family, it can be with your church family, it can be with your chosen family. It's those nourishing connections that seem to me to be kind of the emotional drivers of the season. Well, the interesting thing about connectedness is that it's the opposite of a measuring stick, right? The folks that you're connected to are the folks who accept who you are without judgment. The folks that you're connected to are the folks you accept without judgment. That's the whole point of unconditional love, which it seems to me might have something a little bit to do with why people show up every Sunday at a place like St. John's, that there's a central message about being human and part of the human community, part of the church community, that's centered on that kind of connectedness and that kind of non-judgmental connectedness. Well, again, it's kind of the opposite of a measuring stick, right? You're not taking a measurement of your friends and family. So why are you taking a measurement of yourself? That's probably a reasonable question for all times. But again, I think it's particularly true at this season, where what you do with the holiday is going to be subject to a pretty consistent level of scrutiny internally, right? Because we're all carrying this around in our head. We're all carrying that internal measuring stick. There's nothing we can do about it. There's literally nothing we can do about it. We're always going to have it, but we can set it aside. We can recognize it when it's happening and say, yeah, you know what? This is going to be different. We're not going to have the whole family around the big table. Shoot, we may not even have the turkey. We may not even have the plum pudding. We may not be singing the carols in the same way that we did, but we can still sing the carols. We can still stay connected. And we can still do that through technology. With social distancing, it's going to look different. It's going to feel different. But that core piece of connectedness really doesn't need to be that different. So that's kind of the second piece I would go through. And I think that kind of resonates with, the first thing. There's memories, and those memories can feed an internal yardstick and a sense of measurement. And what that goes to is a sense of not being good enough, right? The holiday not being good enough, us not being good enough. So I think especially right now, it's time to kind of set that aside and say, if we're staying connected, that's actually what makes the holiday. Does that make sense? Okay, that's good. I'm seeing Mother Abby nod, so I'm good there. Yeah, and I was just noting a couple of things in the chat here. Yes, colored lights versus white lights. Very good. From Father Wallace. And the formed by Madison Avenue. Yes, exactly right. In terms of where some of these expectations come from. That, actually the thing that occurs to me, and thank you, David, for putting that in there. One of the things that just sparks for me is the idea that the core of these holidays, the positive core, doesn't really have anything to do with what you see in advertisements, right? It's completely different than that. You can look at the Christmas story, the experience of the Christmas story, and the meaning derived from that. And there are, obviously some issues in the Thanksgiving story that I don't necessarily need to go into. But if you look at the positive core of that, it has to do with people coming together and with community. And that has very little to do with which kind of just cranberry sauce you buy. So I think if we can set those things aside, those measuring sticks and those consumer-driven measuring sticks, that's going to keep things a little more connected. And that brings me to sort of my last differentiating point here. And that has to do with perfection versus good enough for now. And so here's one of the things about this holiday that's really, really interesting, right? It's going to be, this holiday season is going to be way different than it was in 2019. And it's in all likelihood going to be way different than it's going to be in 2021. This is kind of an unusual moment in time. And there are a whole host of things that make this year very unusual. But of course, one of the many, is the pandemic. And living in the healthcare world, which is, where I live, I'm pretty confident that we are going to be in a very, very different place this time next year than we currently are, and actually a better place with the pandemic. But we're not there yet. And so what we're doing this year has got to kind of be seen as a one-off. I'm sympathetic to people talking about what we're doing now as the new normal, but I actually think it's wrong. I think that we've got a very brief window of what we're doing now, and it's going to change again. Now, what it's going to change into, I'm not entirely sure. And nobody is, because we don't know what this is going to look like going forward, but it's probably not going to look like what it is right now. So here's the bad news about that. Sort of, this is a bad news and good news thing. The bad news is we don't really know what's going to happen next, and people hate change. Even people who love change hate change, and I just hate change in general. So I'm I'm not even one of those people who loves change and hates change. I just hate change. I'm not comfortable with it. It's disorganizing for me.
You are an Episcopalian.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point, right? Cradle Episcopalian, 6th generation. Yeah, you get it right there. So no, I'm not a change kind of guy. Even changes that I want to see, I have to kind of get used to. this is a changing holiday season. This is a holiday season that is really not like one we've had in 100 years, and it may not be, in all probability, won't be like the one we're going to have next year. So, like I said, the bad news about this is change is uncomfortable. It's especially uncomfortable when it comes to the holidays. And it kind of goes, I'm sort of repeating the theme here that one of the things that we use holidays for, and it's, since Mother Abby was the one who said it, I actually get to repeat it now, especially for Episcopalians. the resonance of tradition is one of the things that we all love about the church. It just is, even when we change the traditions, right? I mean, that's the beautiful thing about it, right? The content can change, but the rituals remains the same. And so one of the things we all look to the holidays for is that touch point of, oh yeah, I remember this. This is what we've done every year. I'll tell you guys a holiday story that actually I hadn't really planned on telling it, and it has a little poignance to it, but here it is anyway. So when my parents were first married, my father's family was notoriously thrifty. There are probably meaner words for it, but I'll stick with thrifty. And they went out to his house in Ohio for the first Christmas that they had together as a married couple. And my great aunt gave my mother a box of raisins for her Christmas present. And my mom's response was, with this sort of big, amazed smile to say, raisins, I just love raisins. And the family story goes that, my father was so overcome by laughter, he had to kind of stuff his tie in his mouth and run out of the room so that he wasn't cracking up at the dinner table. But every year after that, as long as my mom was alive, my dad gave her raisins. And then after my dad passed away, I started giving her. So every year, that was it. I'd give my mom a box of raisins. And now, since my mom's passed on, every year I buy myself a box of raisins. And it's just this sort of touch point for, it's a holiday touch point. We're not going to be able to do all of those this year. If my mom were alive, I'd order her a box of raisins because no way would she be coming to Florida in the midst of this. So there's some things we can do to accommodate it, but there's probably some things that we can't do. And that's kind of the bad news, that this is change and this is different and it's kind of going to be different. The good news about it is this isn't going to stay the same. What we do in this holiday season does not have to become the new normal for the rest of our lives. This is what we're going to do to get through this year. And especially if we can do it with some flexibility and a little bit of a sense of humor about it, I think we can kind of get through it, still feel that sense of connectedness, and still feel a sense of coming home. That is what you feel at the holidays. Just this year, we're going to be coming home via Zoom. We're not going to be coming home necessarily in person. And if we are, hopefully we're going to be doing it outside where there's plenty of social distance. But it's not something that lasts forever. I'll tell you another holiday story as long as I'm on the topic, because this one seems appropriate too. So one of the most fun Christmases I ever spent was when I had one of my first jobs, which was working as a mental health tech in a small psych hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. And the first Christmas, it was really the first Christmas I'd spent away from home. And I was the low person on the totem pole, so I needed to work Christmas. And so I went in that Christmas, and there was some change of ownership in the hospital. So the census had gone really low. So I ended up working on a 34-bed unit that had 3 clients on it, but was fully staffed. The kitchen made this huge Christmas dinner. We didn't really have to do very much because there were only 3 clients there. And so we ate this big Christmas dinner with all the trimmings and played Trivial Pursuit all day. It was a really fun Christmas, but if I'd thought that I had to spend Christmas that way for the rest of my life, then it would have been very frustrating to not see my family and not have that sense of connectedness. as it was, I knew this was a one-off and I could kind of enjoy it. And I was, 20 when you don't really want to go home for Christmas anyway. So I think the point of this Christmas is this is everybody's working Christmas. This is everybody's Christmas that's not like last year and probably doesn't have to be like next year. And if we can put away that ruler in our head, that yardstick in our head that says it's supposed to be like this could actually be kind of enjoyable. So those are kind of my thoughts on the world of what we're going into with holidays. So let me take a look at I'm looking at the chat here, and
got some good questions in there.
We do have some good questions in there. So there's a question here about dealing with the death of a loved one around the holidays, and let me kind of take that on. I actually think that's a question that's very resonant for the topic that we're talking about here, because you've got two different things happening emotionally. You've got grief and the grieving for the loved one, the grieving for the person who's gone now, and that's something you have to do. And when it's happening at this time of year, when all of the memories about the holidays and the reminders of the holidays also point back to that grief, it's particularly difficult. There are, and I've seen it, I've seen cases and I've experienced it myself, where you've sort of done some of the grief work. You've kind of put away some of that. And then you hit the holidays, and then it all gets brought up again because the holidays are also tied up with memory. I think part of it is, I think you have to honor that. I think you have to say, this is what this is going to be like. This is a time of year when I'm going to remember my loved ones who've gone on more than I do at other times. Like, you have to honor that. You can't deny it. But you also have to let yourself off the hook a little bit. And here's what I mean by that. It's not dishonoring the person you lost to do something new. It's not dishonoring the person you lost to try and find something during the holidays that are a little different than the things that you used to do with that person or with those people, so that you're not consistently bombarded by reminders of what it was like. And the thing about grief is, any kind of grief is, it has a physical impact, right? It has an emotional impact, it has a cognitive impact, and it has a physical impact. So it's like carrying a weight on your shoulders. During the holidays, that weight gets heavier. So one of the things you've got to let yourself do is to put that weight down from time to time. And that's way easier said than done, right? But I think the way to do it is through, I don't mean to trivialize this, but through distraction. Other people, doing things with other people that do not remind you of your loss, doing things that engage your attention for a little bit. Because if you can give yourself 5 minutes without grief, that's 5 minutes without that burden. It's not like the grief won't come back. It will. But if you give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes, especially during the holiday, give yourself a break around this. So it's a tough time of year. My heart goes out to folks who are dealing with that this time of year. And sort of on the other end of the spectrum, there's a note about the impact on kids of COVID and related to the holidays. So here's the interesting thing about kids, right? Again, it's kind of twofold. There are some clear consequences of virtual learning, kids not having the contact that they have with other kids. And I don't want to get into the whole discussion about the school versus no school issue, but I will say that wherever you are on the political spectrum, it's unfortunate that this happened. So there's some consequences there for kids, but at the same time, the thing about kids is that their yardstick, if you will, for what's normal is much shorter than ours are. We talk about that in terms of kids being adaptable, but and that's part of it, but really what it is that kids haven't been here that long, so they don't have as long a memory. And you can kind of watch it with kids, right? With 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds who it may not be like Christmas last year, but it's like Christmas of this year. It may not be like Thanksgiving last year, but it's like Thanksgiving this year. And I think as parents or adults in the child's life, if you put enough energy into that, you can kind of make a new kind of world with that. Now that starts to fade as kids get older. So by the time kids are 10 or 11, certainly by the time they're teenagers, they've got enough of a stock of memories to be dealing with kind of the same things that adults are, with this being not the same as last year. And I think that the key thing with older kids, and for me, the cut line for that is about 10. It's generally the way I kind of think about it, is that kids under the age of 10, if there's sufficient structure and sufficient interaction within the family, even if it's different than it was last year and different than it's going to be next year, I think you can kind of make it into new kinds of things. And there's a comment from Ms. Kesey here that COVID pushes us to create new ways of celebrating. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is kind of new ways of celebrating with younger kids. With older kids, I think you just have to talk to them about this. This is for, kids who are 13, 14 years old. You can have the conversation. This is where we're at. This is what's going on in terms of public health. And this is why it's not like last year. And you know what? It's okay to be irritated by that. It's okay to be sad about it. It's okay to say, this thing of having Thanksgiving on Zoom sucks. I don't get to actually play with my cousins. I don't get to do any of this stuff. This is ridiculous. Yeah, sure it is. There's no way around that. But I think if you don't have the conversation, this I think is the key with kids who are, sort of middle schoolers on up. I think that one of the things that can make for a really bad holiday, or actually a really bad interaction with kids in that age group in general, is when there's this disconnect between what's really going on and what you're pretending is going on. So if you're pretending that this isn't different, the kid knows that. The kids get that. And all it does is give them the sense that there's this acceptable, sort of world that you're lying about, and then this real world where things aren't so great. If you, as the parent or the adult, can acknowledge, yeah, things aren't so great, the sense of relief. I spent years working with kids and young adults, and I remember this very vividly, the sense of relief that kids experience when an adult, a trusted adult, says to them, yeah, you know what, that's kind of not great. Yeah, that's kind of not terrific. Yeah, I'm sorry we have to go through this, because it lets them actually feel what they're feeling. So I think that's a piece of the way that you go forward with kids, but I do think it's dependent on developmental levels. I also see that Ms. Turner put in here, it's probably good for all of us to make new traditions. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's, I think as traditions, and I think this in general, I don't think this is just a COVID thing, and it does, sort of, I can feel generations of Episcopal ancestors being outraged as I say this, but it's actually what I think. I think if traditions get too disconnected from what the reality of our daily lives are, it's kind of going back to what I was just talking about with telling the truth to kids. there's this disjunction, and as it grows and grows and becomes wider and wider, then the traditions become meaningless, and there's no real guidance for how we're living our daily life. So if things are getting that distance, it's kind of time to bring them back together so that we can integrate a little bit with what we're doing and the rituals and the sort of symbolic gestures that we're making around the holidays and what our holidays are really like. So it is, I think
11:46.
it's 11:46, which I think is kind of my time zone here. And I don't exactly remember.
Thank you. No, you're good. Are the questions? I've got a question while others are maybe thinking about one. I love this. Thank you, Jay. This has been very, very helpful. We're going to use your template as part of some of our small groups to talk about in December as we move into December, how to put this into practice.
Okay.
But to throw one out while to give some people some time to think. We've got all these Christmas traditions in my house, right? And trying to be perfect, and we're not going to be perfect. But there is some. So talk me through. There are going to be some things for me, like some traditions that I'm fine letting go of some, but I also need to keep some and need to be able to articulate that to my spouse. How do I walk us through the maybe discernment process on how I decide what to keep and what to let go of? Because there are certain things that, as I said in my children's sermon today, I love to mow the yard. I mean, that's why I planted ryegrass. It's kind of therapeutic. I need to mow the yard. We don't need to have a dead season. So there's things like that in Christmas that I'm fine not going to a bunch of these parties. But there's some traditions I need to tell Margaret Ann that, okay, you got to have this and I need to have that. How do we go about doing that?
Okay, really, really good question. And actually, guys, I'm really glad you asked that, actually, because it reminds me of something that I was thinking about when I was preparing for the discussion today. So one of the things about holidays is that they make us unconscious. They knock us unconscious. Actually, I can almost put it that way, which is one of the reasons why when adult children come home, they act more like children than adults. And that's true when you're in your 50s. I mean, it's, that's not something that ends when kids turn 21, right? That's kind of like forever. It's because holidays make us unconscious because of exactly what we were talking about before, is that, there's sense memories that sort of take us back to childhood, and we return to that place in part because we want to return to that place, and we feel like we're going to be nourished by returning to that place. One of the things that folks may have noticed is that the older you get, the less nourishing that experience is. There's actually a lot of disappointment around it, where going home for Christmas when you're 19 feels different than it does when you're 29. It feels different than it does when you're 39. It feels way different than it does when you're 49, because every year as you move away from actually being a child, that experience of kind of wrapping yourself up in childhoodness again gets less satisfying, which again leads to generally some bad behavior around the holidays. So and I really, really like your use of the term and the idea of discernment around holiday traditions, because what this holiday, and particularly with COVID, but honestly, we should be doing this every year, what it forces us towards is to use, Father Wallace point that he still gets a curfew. Yeah, exactly. But it forces us to make some of that conscious. And that's a little hard because it runs against the whole spirit of the holiday. Well, not what I consider to be the real spirit, but what a lot of us have imbibed as the spirit. But it forces us to go back and think about the holiday parties, what we do with the tree, who we see, how we manage the dinner, and what kind of meaning each of those things actually has. And what you end up with at the end of the day, what I think you end up with, is a chosen set of holiday traditions, which kind of goes back to Ms. Turner's point about making new traditions. They don't necessarily have to be new, but you can select, you can make decisions about what you keep and what you don't. And, let me throw this out. Maybe this doesn't happen to people other than me, but it does to me. I can get irritated by members of my family who have evolved what they consider to be holiday traditions that I don't think of as holiday traditions at all. I had a cousin who really liked to play charades at Christmas. I didn't have any interest in playing charades at Christmas. We didn't play charades when I was a kid. I didn't want to do that. But that was something that she kind of evolved because it gave some structure to the family gathering and helped, keep things rolling in a way that she really wanted. So what I guess the response I have to that is that it's a discussion and a conversation, and it's a use of discernment around each thing you do for the holidays. And it involves maybe more planning than you've done before. It involves maybe more thoughtfulness in terms of, do we do this, do we do that, than you've done before. But I think what you lose in that is that regression to being a kid again, where everything's kind of planned and mapped out for you. But what you gain is probably more of a connection between what you're doing in the holidays this year and what's actually meaningful for you than previously was the case. So that's kind of where I would go. Yeah. David Wheeler points out all families play charades in one way or another. Well, you do have a point there. Get no argument from me. It's actually probably my distaste for charades is one of the things that led me to become a psychologist, but I need to get into that. So Father Wallace, does that make sense? Okay, cool. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions or things that folks want to talk about? Okay. Well, hearing none, that was, as usual, I love coming to these conversations, and I really appreciate and was very honored to have been invited for it. So I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving and a terrific Christmas. And just, when you'd like to do talks like this, just let me know. I'm always available, always happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Jay. It is always good to hear your voice and the analogies that help us cope with where we are right here. And as you said, I feel like we're in a different phase of COVID than July, and we're not at the end phase yet either. And it's, I think for me, teaching us what the core things we want to hold on to are, and the accentuation of what we have to let go of and might not have been good for us to begin with. So thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed. I'm just writing it right now. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you guys for having me.
A couple of quick announcements before we leave, and thank you again, Dr. Reeve. This has been wonderful. Next week we will have Sabrina Hartsfield, who's we pray for Sabrina every week. She's our urban missioner. She's doing the Episcopal Service Corps. She'll be here to talk about that. So we welcome her. The second thing is the Advent speaker is Ashley Brown Ruiz, which is Brene Brown's sister. She will be leading our talk on about using Brene Brown's book, The Gift of Imperfection, looking at Advent as Jesus kind of doing some things that maybe the Messiah wasn't supposed to be doing. So I think you'll enjoy that. There's a link to that this week, so register for that.
And just to add, just like our Advent speakers before, all the proceeds from that event will go to the Oasis Center for Girls. So it's a great cause. She is a great advocate for women, along with growing in our own sense of personhood too. I just wanted to make sure we said that too. Well, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're great. So see you all. I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving, blessed Thanksgiving. Thank you for this helpful content, Dr. Reeve, and look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Advent 1. Take care. God bless.